Who can give me a pair of corresponding angles? What would be a pair of corresponding angles? Two and which one? 2 and 6. Angle 2 and angle 6. For those of you that are struggling, when we're talking about corresponding angles, we want matching corners. So we're looking for where any two lines cross. So I can look at these top two lines. I'm going to pick out an angle up here. So we picked out the upper left. Then I look at the other spot where two lines are crossing, and I'm looking at the upper left angle. So that's why angle 2 and angle 6 are corresponding angles. What's another pair of corresponding angles? Which ones? 1 and 5. 3 and 7. Angle 4 and angle 8. Nicely done. And then what's the relationship between my corresponding angles? Are they congruent or are they supplementary? They are not. These are actually congruent, funny enough. This is one of the ones that we were just given as a postulate or a theorem. These angles, if you look, they have very similar shapes. They look like they're about the same size, and so there is a proof for this. We didn't go through and do the proof, but corresponding angles are the same size. They are congruent. All right, what about my alternate interior angles? Who can give me a pair of alternate interior angles? Which ones? Angle 3 and angle 5, yes. Angle 3 and angle 5. Remember, alternate means opposite side of transversal. And the interior part means in between the two lines. Okay, so angle 3 and angle 5. What's another pair of alternate interior angles? Angle 4 and angle 6. Are there any other alternate interior angles? Nope, we only have 2 pairs. Are those congruent or supplementary? These ones are congruent. If you look at what we said before about our corresponding angles, we were told that the corresponding angles were congruent. Well, I know that vertical angles are also congruent, so angle 2 would be the same size as angle 4 because those are vertical angles. And so using my transitive property, that means that 4 and 6 would have to be the same size. So corresponding angles are congruent, and alternate interior angles are also congruent. Right, we are going to spend the rest of our time together today in your extra notes packet. We're going to use your book tomorrow, so please make sure you bring that with you tomorrow. But we're going to be in your extra notes packet starting on page 5 down at the bottom, which is where we left off on Friday. Go ahead and pull out your notes. Down at the bottom of page 5 is where we're starting. So on Friday, we defined 4 new vocabulary words. We talked about altitudes and medians. An altitude is where I go from a vertex to the opposite side, and when it hits the opposite side, it makes a right angle. A median goes from a vertex to the opposite side, only it hits the midpoint of the opposite side. And then we added these other 2 vocabulary words, centroid and orthocenter. When I draw in all 3 medians of a triangle, So vertex to the opposite side midpoint for each of my 3 vertices and each of my 3 sides. We call that the centroid, where they intersect each other. Where my 3 altitudes intersect each other, we call the orthocenter. All right, so looking at number 6, I have this triangle ABC. I want to label the midpoints here, D, E, and F. So I'm going to label the midpoint of this side D. If D is the midpoint, what's true about AD and BD? They're going to be equal to each other. They're going to be congruent because D is the midpoint. I'm going to put point E down here on the bottom. E is also supposed to be a midpoint. So if E is a midpoint, what's true about AE and CE? They're congruent. AE is the same size as CE. And then on my side BC, I'm going to label my 3rd midpoint F. If F is a midpoint, what's true about BF and CF? They're congruent. Right, I want to draw in the 3 medians now. Look up at the top of the page. A median goes from a vertex to what? A median goes from a vertex to where? To the midpoint. So if I draw a line segment from A and it comes over here to F, F is a midpoint, that is a median. From B down to E is also a median. And then from C to F would be a median. And then they wanted me to label the point where all 3 of those are intersecting. It says the intersection of the 3 medians we are supposed to label as the centroid, G. So right here, I'm going to call this point G. And this is the centroid. So it turns out that centroids and medians have some really cool properties. I want you to look at each of these medians and their relationship to the centroid. So here's my centroid. Look at this orange median here from A to F. Do you see how there's a small segment here and then this part over here is longer? So there's a small part and a big part. And if I look at this light blue median, there's the same thing. There's a small part and a big part. And from C to D, there's a small part and a big part when I look at where that centroid is. So that short segment goes from the centroid to the midpoint. We're going to call that length X. So I'm going to look at my picture over here. From the centroid to the midpoint F, I'm going to call that length X. From the centroid to this midpoint down here at E, I'm going to call that X. From the centroid to this midpoint D, I'm going to call that length X. So the short segment we're going to say has a length of X. The longer segment which goes from the centroid to the vertex, is twice as big. So we're going to label that as 2x. So when I look at this orange one from A to F, centroid to the midpoint, centroid to F is X. From G to A is 2X. It's twice as big. From G to E is X. So from G to B is 2X. From G to D, because D is a midpoint, that distance is X. From G to C is twice as big. So that is 2X. So when I'm labeling my triangles, when I'm looking at these triangles, from the centroid to the midpoint gets labeled as X. From the centroid to the vertex gets labeled as 2X. So the whole segment would have to be how big? If this short piece is X and the big piece is 2X, how big is the whole thing? 3X. All right, so there's a whole bunch of stuff. If they tell me that something is a median, or sorry, if they tell me something is a centroid, then I know the segments that are drawn in are medians. I know where they're hitting the opposite side is a midpoint. And I know it has these relationships here. The short part from the centroid to the midpoint is going to be X. And from the centroid to the vertex is going to be 2X. So I want to practice using this to solve some problems. If you flip over to page 6, we've got some examples over there. Before I even look at the questions, A, B, C, and D, I'm looking at my triangle here and what it tells me up at the top. It says that G is the centroid. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to label that. G is the centroid. Well, if G is the centroid, what would we call all these little segments that are drawn inside my triangle? Medians. Segments inside triangle are medians. Well, if those segments inside the triangle are medians, then what would we call point D, point E, and point F? Midpoints. Well, if point E is a midpoint, what does that mean about AE and BE? If E is a midpoint, what's true about AE and BE? They're congruent, so I'm going to mark them as congruent. If D is the midpoint on the bottom, what does that mean about AD and CD? They're congruent. We're going to go in and mark this on all of these. Anytime they tell me about a centroid, I'm going to mark my triangle all up. What about BF and CF? They are also congruent. Now I want to label my X and my 2X. Remember, from the centroid to a midpoint gets labeled as X. That's the short segment. So from E to G would be X. From the centroid to the vertex would get labeled with what? 2X. How would we label from A to G? Would that be X or 2X? 2X. What about from F to G? That would be X. From G to D? X. And from G to B, 2x. This is the first thing I do whenever they say something is the centroid. I come in and I mark my picture all up with my x's, my 2x's, and my midpoints marked and labeled. All right, so let's look at how to use this. They tell me right here in part A that from A to F is 48. From A to F is that whole median. And we said on the other side that if this little piece is x and this slightly larger piece is 2x, how big is the whole thing then? 3x. So from A to F is 3x. It also says from A to F is 48. So 3x is equal to 48. What would I need to do to that to figure out how big x is? Divide both sides by 3. What is 48 divided by 3? 16. X is 16. Now I'm supposed to figure out the size from A to G. How did we have that marked on the picture? From A to G is x or 2x? From A to G is 2x. And we just said that x was how much? 16. So I do 2 times 16. What is 2 times 16? 32. What about from G to F? That's just 16. This one is x, so that is just 16. So far, so good? All right, let's look at the next one. The next one says from B to G is 30. Well, here's B, and G is that centroid. How do we have that labeled on the picture? From B to G is labeled as 2x. So 2x is equal to 30. If 2x is equal to 30, how big is x? 15. So how big is the distance from G to D? 15, because that's labeled as x on my picture, so that is 15. What about the whole thing from B to D? What did we say from B to D should be labeled as? X, 2x, or 3x? 3x. Well, we just found out a minute ago that x was 15, so I would do 3 times 15 and get what? 45. Halfway done with this question. It says from E to G, this bit right here, from E to G is 7. Well, we have it labeled as what on the picture? As x. So x is 7. What about from G to C? 2x. Well, if x is 7, then that would be how big? 14. From E to C would be the whole thing, which is 3x. We said that x is 7, so this would be how big? 21. All right, last part of this one. It says from A to D. Go over to my picture. Where is AD on this picture? Is that on the inside of my triangle or on the edge of my triangle? It's on the edge. From A to D is right here. It says this distance right here is 4x minus 2. And then it says from A to C is 3x plus 13. Well, where's that in the picture? Is that whole side over there from A to C is 3x plus 13. What's the relationship from the segment, or between the segment AD and AC? Remember, we know that D is the midpoint. So what would the relationship be between this little piece that I have marked in red and this larger piece that's marked in blue? Yeah, the red one is half of the blue one. Or we could say that if I do what to the red one, I'd get the size of the blue one. If I double it, if I times it times 2, right? Because this piece and this piece would be the same size. That'd be 2 pieces to make the whole piece. So 2 times AD is equal to AC. And then in the place of AD, we can substitute in 4x minus 2. What should I put in the place of AC? 3x plus 13. What's the first thing I should do on this if I'm going to try to solve it for x? Distribute. 2 times 4 and 2 times 2. What's 2 times 4? 8x. And 2 times 2? 4. So 8x minus 4 equals 3x plus 13. I want to solve this for x. Are the x's on the same side? No, let's get them there then. I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. What is 8x minus 3x? 5x. So 5x minus 4 equals 13. What should I do next? Add 4 to both sides. So I get 5x equals 17. And then what? And then divide both sides by 5. Do we get a whole number? Nope. Is the decimal reasonably okay? What is 17 divided by 5? 3.4. So x is 3.4. Very nice work. Let's go look at the next one. We'll do the next one together, and then I'll give you guys the last one to practice on your own. All right? What's the first thing that they tell us on number 8? D is the centroid. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my picture. I'm going to label my centroid. So what does that mean about B, C, and F? They're midpoints. So AB is the same size as EB. EF is the same size as GF. AC is the same size as GC. Then I'm going to label my X's and my 2X. From A to D should be labeled with what? 2X. I'm just going to move my way around the triangle clockwise. CD should be what? X. DG, 2X. DF, X. DE, 2X. And DB, X. Beautiful. Remember, if it goes from the centroid to a midpoint, it's X. If it goes from the centroid to a corner, to a vertex, it's 2X. All right, let's look at this. It says from A to F is 18, from here all the way to the bottom. So is that X, 2X, or 3X? 3X. So I have 3X equals 18, which means X is how big? X is 6. So how big is it from A to D then? 12. That's 2X. So we do 2 times 6, which gives us 12. What about from D to F? 6. Yep, it is the size of X, so it is 6. We don't label it as 6X. We just use that X as a placeholder. so that I can get my relationships down here. So I have x, 2x, and 3x to show me that the whole segment is 3 times as big as the centroid to the midpoint. From the centroid to the vertex is twice as big as from the centroid to the midpoint. All right, let's look at another one. ED. From E to D is 27. How do we have it labeled on our picture? So 2x is equal to 27, which means x would have to be how big? 13.5. From E to C is the whole thing. How am I going to figure out from E to C? 3x. So 3 times 13.5. What is 3 times 13.5? 40.5. How big is CD? 13.5. Halfway done. Says BD, this much right here, is 19. Is that x, 2x, or 3x? X. So x is 19. That's pretty big. How would I figure out DG, this much right here? 2x. So that would be 2 times 19, which is 38. Thank you. What about BG, the length of that whole median? 3x. So I would do 3 times 19, which is 57. All right, last one on this question here. They tell me that EF is 2H plus 10. From E to F, right here. 2H plus 10. And then it says from F to G is 32. Well, what do we know about that point F? It's a midpoint. So what does that mean about EF and FG? They are equal, they're congruent. EF is equal to FG. So now I can substitute in the place of EF, I'm going to put 2H plus 10. In the place of FG, we're going to put what? 32. I want to solve this for H. What should I do? Subtract 10 from both sides, which gives me 2H equals what? 2H equals 22. Well, if 2H equals 22, how big is H? 11. All right. I'm going to give you guys let's take about 4, maybe 5 minutes to do number 9 on your own. I want you to label your triangles, mark your sides, the pieces that are congruent, mark your x, 2x, and 3x, and then go in and answer those questions. how would you answer part A? What do we call these pink segments that are inside the triangle? Medians. The pink segments inside the triangle are medians. And I know that because it says V is the centroid. So this piece right here needs to be labeled as the centroid. Come from this direction, I'll have some more room. So first thing you need to do when you know that is the centroid, you need to mark your sides that are congruent, because U, S, and T are midpoints. The other thing I need to do is label my X's and my 2X. From V to U is X, because that's a short segment. It's going to a midpoint. So from V to Q is 2X. From S to V is X. From R to V is 2X. From V to D, T, it looks pretty large, but it's going to a midpoint, so that is X. And you'll notice from V to P is longer. That is my 2X. If VU equals 8, how big is X? 8. X equals 8. What about from V to Q? 16. 2 times 8 gives me 16. What about the whole thing, Q to U? How much? 24, because that would be 3 times 8. All right, part C, from V to R is 22. If from V to R is 22, how big is X? 11. 2X equals 22. So X would be 11. How big is from S to R? How much? 33. Be 3 times 11, so 33. And so from S to V would be 11. QR, is that inside my triangle? No. QR is on the edge of my triangle. 8y minus 16 from here down to here. And then we have TR, 3y plus 7. What's the relationship between TR and QR? Yeah. TR is half, so 2 times TR is equal to QR. So 2 times 3y minus 7 is equal to 8y minus 16. Then I need to distribute the 2. So I get 6y minus 14 equals 8y minus 16. After I do my distributing, if my y's aren't on the same side, that's the very next thing I need to do. So I'm going to subtract 6y from both sides. I get, wait, that's plus 7, I'm sorry. That shouldn't be minus, those should be pluses. I wrote it down wrong. 14 equals 2y minus 16. I add 16 to both sides. I get that 30 is equal to 2y. So y is how big? Y is 15. Is that what I put on the line there? No, they wanted QT. How do I find QT? Use the TR equation. QT is the same size as TR. So QT is equal to 3y plus 7. So I do 3 times 15 plus 7. What is 3 times 15? 45 plus 7 would give me how much? 52. So QT is 52. All right, last bit. it says that PT is 27. Is PT x, 2x, or 3x? What'd you say? 3x. So if PT is 27, 3x is 27, how big is x? 9. So how big is PV then? 18, 2 times 9. And VT? Just 9, because that's x. Very, very nice work, guys. Homework number 3, which you should have picked up on Friday, is over here in this red set of papers if you need an extra copy or if you weren't here on Friday to pick it up. Very bottom paper in this red set of papers due tomorrow. You could also do the problems out of your book. The worksheet gives you more workspace to do that on.